Welcome everyone to our first official Equity and Inclusion Committee event. So this committee was recently formed in 2020, completely remote. And even though systemic racism is not new, last year we saw a highly visible resurgence in the need for change. Some have not experienced our truths, others have turned a blind eye, but that is no more. Our industry is evolving, and one of the many ways to do so is through having uncomfortable conversations, listening, and educating. Educating others as well as educating ourselves. There is a lot of work that needs to be done, and it has to start from somewhere. To join our committee and to learn more about our upcoming plans, please visit our website or email us. I'll add that information to the chat. But with that, I'd like to introduce music editor, PNYA member, and huge advocate of our committee and our objectives, Sucheta Sakdev.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I, as Rebecca said, part of PNYA, recently have started to become a music editor, quite recently, enjoying it. If anyone has any questions about that, happy to talk about that as well. But today we're here to talk with Sherman and Shakri. They caught my attention because I know Shakri from way back in high school. I sat 2 seats in front of Shakri in English class, and I was the new girl, so I didn't really talk to too many people. And years later, Shakri and I connected at Sundance, I think, right? Yeah. Yes. And we've been in touch ever since. And it's funny that now we're in sort of adjacent places. And so when he and Sherman put out this podcast, I don't even remember how I came across it. I think you might have told me about it. And I just fell in love with it. And I thought about how relevant and funny and poignant and timely and everything that was happening in the moment. These guys had something smart to say about it. And so I wanted to, bring them in and talk about the challenges that they see, because they're very much in the thick of it in their work. I want them to talk about their podcast. I basically want to like be a fly on the wall in their podcast, but this is as close as I could come. So, please join me in welcoming Shakri and Sherman.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thanks.
So I would say, why don't you guys start by telling us like how you guys got your start in Hollywood, and then how this idea about the podcast came about, and what you're seeing as you create this.
Want me to start, Sherm?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I guess a brief breaking in story. For me, I went to undergrad to college at NYU, studied film there. At the time, I had no sort of concept of what studying film meant, or film school or anything. I wasn't even we didn't even have an AV club in high school that came later, actually, as I understand. But so I didn't really exactly know what I was doing, but I was going to study something that was the arts. And so once I was there, I sort of got bit actually after I was there with the film bug, and thought I wanted to be a director. Eventually sort of got into, after college, got into working mostly on documentaries and this new thing that was sort of coming around at the time called reality shows, and started to get into that and reality series. And I worked mainly as an assistant in post, as an assistant editor, and then eventually as an editor, and worked on shows like Dog the Bounty Hunter and, all these crazy shows at TLC, house flipping shows, and these things that lots of shows that have gone by the wayside. But eventually, in the midst of doing all that, I sort of like discovered / rediscovered this love for writing and this need to want to write, mainly because it was free and I liked it. At the time, it wasn't so democratic to be able to pick up a camera and make a film. It really cost a lot of money at that time. Even still, it was moving towards democracy in terms of, you just pick up your iPhone and do it, but we weren't quite there. So I went to pick up a pen, basically, and sort of taught myself to write, and then eventually, through some ups and downs, eventually decided to go to graduate school for screenwriting. at Columbia University, which is where I met Sherman. He was there a year before me. And then other stuff that we can get into more specifically later if it comes up, but eventually wrote a script that got some attention a few years after we graduated. And then that kind of led to my first break. And I've been working as a paid writer in television since 2014. So about 7 years now, and that's my story.
Yeah, my story really did start off, stereotypically enough, in the high school AV club. I had moved from New York City to, my parents relocated to suburban Cincinnati, and I started at this high school just when they had built like their brand new state of the art, like multi-million dollar late 90s high school. And one of the benefits of going to that high school was they had built this like crazy video lab, for video production and school announcements. And, there was a dark room and just had like all sort of the post-production. There was something called Media 100, which was hot in the streets back in the mid 90s and late 90s that we all learned how to edit on. And so I was just, I really took a class just to check it out. And it was one of those things. By my senior year, I had like jerry-rigged my schedule so that 7 out of 8 periods were all in that media lab, and I just had a free-for-all. The teacher was the defensive coordinator for the football team, so he really didn't care what we did. He was like diagramming plays. We could do whatever we wanted, and I just got a chance to explore, and I had a lot of fun. And I put together videos with my friends, and we won a few contests. I got an award from the governor. It was amazing. But when I graduated, I wanted to sort of formalize my education. I really had fallen in love with this. I don't really even know if it was filmmaking yet. It was sort of like video projects and goofing around, but I wanted to learn more. And I ended up going to a great state school in Ohio called Wright State University, where I learned basically the art and history of cinema, but also real film, production techniques. This was before the HD revolution. And so I learned how to do it on, what is it called? A Steenbeck. I was actually cutting film and shooting film and like learning how to load film in a tent and all that stuff. And once I graduated from undergrad and I was sort of wanting to be like a writer director and be like an indie festival darling, I felt like I wanted to keep going, and I enrolled at Columbia. And as I was sort of chasing the writer director dream at Columbia, the directing part just naturally fell by the wayside. And I realized that I was waking up every morning excited to write, and that chasing film production and direction was more just a way for people to pay attention to what I was writing, because people don't, like your mom isn't going to sit down and read your script probably, but she might watch what you actually produced. And so I sort of thought like, well, there's a career, I'm growing up, there's a career in writing, let me chase that. And so I did just that, and moved out to LA shortly after grad school, about a year after grad school, and wrote a feature film, which sold to a production company, and I haven't looked back. That was 2012. I've been working ever since.
Very cool. That's both very, sorry, my brain is like all over the place. Thank you for that. That was great. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the idea for the podcast came about? And I love the title, and because I listened to many episodes, I understand what it means, but not everyone does. And so I feel like we did encourage people to listen to the first episode. We're not sure if everyone did. Hopefully everybody did. But if you could give us like a quick 2-3 sentences about what the title is about and what that means, and again, how this idea for the podcast came about.
I'm gonna let Shakri explain the title because he has some personal experience in that world. I think the way that it came about was that, Shakri and I, we really came through this industry together. It's sort of funny that Shakri and I's lives, like once we met, really mirrored each other by just like a year or a few months. Like I got engaged, and then he got engaged, and then he got a job, and then I got, and like we were always like hopping on the phone with each other to like discuss like these big life events that were going on. And of course, a lot of that stuff had to do with screenwriting. And so we would just get in these, hour-long conversations talking about industry stuff. Like, what does this contract mean? What does this contract provision mean? Why do you think I should do this job? What do you think about what they're offering me? And we just go back and forth. And then I think some point, just sort of slowly, we said like, maybe other people might be interested in these conversations that we have. And we kicked around for a long time the idea of starting a podcast, partially because we thought the conversations we were having were interesting, but partially because we thought that there was a real sort of, there was a gaping need for like a Black perspective in the world of screenwriting. Because a lot of the stuff we would talk about would be things that were screenwriting specific, but were very specific to us as young Black men at the time. So we kicked around that idea for a minute, and our schedules just never allowed for us to do it. There were like a few babies born in that time, and like other things going on. And then finally, when the pandemic hit and we were stuck at home, we said, "Yo, we could really, really do this." So I'll let Shakri tell you about the title because he's actually lived it.
Yeah, that's exactly how the podcast came about, which is, it's just interesting to replay that, to remember. We got to remember that, Sharon. That's good. The diversity hires, that term, the diversity hire, I think has different applications in different industries. It's probably round about the same thing, but in our industry, it is essentially, in a nutshell, studios, production companies, whatever other entities, businesses that make television and film typically have some sort of program, although it varies in size and scope and how it's applied, but have some sort of program in which a writer, sometimes producer, but in our case, a writer, can get a, in quotes, what's called a diversity slot, or can be a diversity hire, which means that the studio has set aside some money, or the company has set aside some money for a writer from a diverse background to get a spot on that show, on that film, whatever. And typically, it's not coming out of that show's budget. So it's an incentive program to try to bring new people into the industry. It has a double-edged sword, as we talk about a lot on the podcast, but that's essentially, so we use that as our title because my first job was as a quote diversity hire. That's how I got in. I had a good experience. I was promoted sort of out of the diversity slot after my first year. And it was good. It worked for me, but that's not always the case for folks.
And so what I find interesting is I remember listening to your podcast, and what happens after the second year? So you got promoted out.
Yeah.
But I find really interesting is what now the production company now has to decide whether to keep that person on. Isn't that right? How does that work?
That's right. And this is, as I said, it's a little bit different place to place, but the situation I'm talking about is specifically for television and television writers' rooms. I'm sure this can be applied in other places, but there may be slight variations. But in television writers' rooms, yes, the deal that the studio makes is that they will pay typically for 1 year. Now, some have adjusted so that to solve this problem, that they make it 2 years, but they will provide the funds for this writer for 1 year. So if I'm a showrunner hiring, I essentially get a quote free writer. It's not coming out of my budget, it's coming out of the studio's budget. So what does it matter? I might as well bring this person on. But if that show continues and I want to keep that writer on for the next year, I got to pay for that. It has to come out of my budget. That program is over. So what happens a lot of times is that the showrunner or whoever's making the decision, usually it's the showrunner, decides that that person is not worth it because they're no longer free. I now have to, like, as a showrunner, you have your budget for writers is a certain amount. It goes up a little bit the second year, but you have to make decisions. So are you gonna, are you gonna bump somebody? Are you gonna keep somebody else that you've already had at a certain level and not give them a raise? What are you gonna do to negotiate your budget so that you can promote this other person, and now have them count against your budget? So that's what makes it a double-edged sword. And also, there is some disingenuousness in just whatever the word is, in hiring that quote free writer sometimes, because sometimes they're not given, it's not seen as a position of value. It's just seen as long as they're free, it's fine. But once it counts, I don't know that I'm going to hire this person and bring this person. So people bounce around. I think you can become a diversity hire more than once. So sometimes people bounce around and get stuck at that level because they're not getting promoted out of it, or sometimes they just, which happens a lot, just drop completely out of the business. So you have somebody that makes a good, works really hard, gets their break, finally gets in, doesn't get promoted, or the show goes away. Maybe they get one other shot on another show. That person doesn't want to promote them either, and then they're done. They never sort of get back in the industry.
That's a lot.
That's
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wow. So people, so basic, wow. So showrunners basically are making this decision in the second year if it's worth it. So it's almost like, do you feel like, or from what you're seeing in your experience so far, and I know you guys are not in those programs, but are you seeing other folks who are just hired to like check off a box? Is that what it's coming down to basically?
What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that does happen. I think there has been, I will say to the industry's credit, I think there has been, Shakri was talking earlier about disingenuousness, and I do think in the wake of like Black Lives Matter exploding over the past few years, and especially this summer, I do think a lot of people are making a good faith effort to diversify their staffs and really trying to do it and like do it from a genuine place. I still think that those programs they have their flaws, right? Because like Shakri said, it encourages you to hire somebody, but it also almost encourages you not to retain them because now they're like an additional weight on your budget. So I think that people are making a better effort to like have, because television, if you guys don't know, I'm sure a lot of you do, is like, it's very hierarchical. And so like the diversity hire slot is for a new writer, a first or second time writer, somebody very low on the hierarchy. And I think a lot of shows are making a real effort to find those mid-level and high-level writers and put them into places of more power and more agency, because I think that people are really starting to value diverse voices in their rooms. I think it's a double-edged sword. I mean, just like Shakri said, there's no way. It's really about how the showrunner responds to it. I don't think there's like a blanket statement that can encompass like, yo, this is all bad or this is all good. I think it's more about like, how does the individual showrunner use that as a tool? Because in the best case scenario, they're using it as a tool to expose themselves, knowing their own biases, expose themselves to writers they normally wouldn't hire, and maybe finding a young writer who really deserves to be promoted and be in this industry. The worst case scenario is what Shakri described, which is like, I'm just getting a free person in the room. I don't really value them. I'm sort of putting them over there in that chair where we all know they're here for free, which I've heard has happened a lot. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I feel about sort of the state of diversity hires.
Can I just piggyback and say, like, that's one of the sort of not so great things, is that it does ultimately come down to an individual, because you're right. If it's, and that's part of the reason that it's a double-edged sword, is it's not that reform or whatever, that sort of trying to correct an issue is not really at a systemic level. It's really, it actually comes down to one person. The policy to get the person in is a systemic thing, is it like a system thing, a policy thing? But the retain thing, which actually matters more in a lot of ways, is really up to an individual. And luckily, I had an individual who maybe not the, well, whatever, I won't say anything, but what he was very adamant about, and you could tell this even when he was hiring, was you're not just here to be a diversity hire. I'm getting you for free. Great. That's fantastic. That's smart business on my part. But I want you to stick around. So I'm hoping you're the best writer. And I think he had sort of known a little bit about him. I think he had in his mind known that he wanted to have a diverse staff, and he wanted to retain a diverse staff going forward. So if he had to do that, put it against his own budget, I think he was thinking about that ahead of time. Now, if I sucked, then he would have fired me.
But instead, you brought the heat. You wrote plans down on the page, and you were undeniable. Oh my God.
That's right. That's exactly right, Sherman. Of course.
I think we have some questions. Rebecca, did you want to read a couple out?
Sure. We have one from Hosinatu. So are there any diversity and inclusion programs that are really doing what they're supposed to be doing? Do you know of any?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of goes to what Shakri has said about, you know, the systemic changes versus how shows are run, right? And what I mean by that is there are some great things at the systemic studio, you know, top tier bird's eye view level that are really great that we've commended on the podcast. You know, CBS put out a great initiative where they really made, I think, the effort to have like 40% of all their staffs be people of color, some huge number, and like really putting money where their mouth is. But at the end of the day, the way that television is run and the way that it's been run for a very long time and the way that it continues to be run is the showrunner is in charge of individual shows. And so as much as there can be big systemic programs and I think all those programs are really working well, you know, they do what they say they're going to do. They find talented minority writers and they put them in the position to get hired. I mean, what more can you ask for in terms of that? Like, that's really great. But when it comes down to an individual, I mean, all you have to do is Google like problematic showrunner and you'll see why that doesn't. What's that?
Greg Spottiswoode, the guy from All Rise. There's a huge article in Salon about it. But anyway.
Just that today. And it's like, so when there's no accounting for individual showrunners, right? Like, how do you systemically change individual showrunners? I would submit that like we need more people of color showrunners and we need more women showrunners and we need more LGBT showrunners to really diversify those ranks. I think is the way that you long-term ensure that people get in the pipeline and stay in the pipeline, and we teach the next generation and the next generation, and hopefully it's exponential growth. But short of that, it's always going to be an uneven fit between the macro level and the micro level of each show.
Yeah, can I piggyback on that? Because I think we talked to a guy, Alan McElroy, on our podcast. Alan is a film and television writer. I mean, he's been in the business since like 1984 or something. He writes on, or maybe runs Star Trek right now. I can't remember, but he's a huge guy, very super nice guy. I worked with him on the Vampire Diaries. He talked about a diversity program. Do you remember this, Sherman? That he came through at Columbia Pictures or whatever it was back then in like 1988. Right? And so still in 2020, we're still experiencing the same sort of lack of numbers, right? So I think what you hit on is exactly right, that like, if to this question, if there is a flaw, which there is, the flaw is not necessarily, they are doing the job, those programs do the job of getting people in. What the flaw is keeping people in, number one. And then number two, I think the key to that flaw is exactly what Sherman said, is that what they're not bringing in is leadership. Power is different than representation. So you can have a lot of representation and no power. So you can also have, you know what I mean? So you have to sort of have representation where power lies, in leadership, in people that make decisions, in gatekeepers. That sort of helps to, I think it's that shift that people are starting to see, and that the powers that be, so to speak, are starting to understand that. Companies are starting to understand that. And for example, that CBS thing you mentioned, Sherman, like a big part of that, I mean, CBS is a bad offender, so they have to sort of overcorrect. But you know, I think it's 25% or something like that of their development slate. So that means Black creators. They have put that number at 25%. So that's where they want to reach. So that means that like those are people who will be coming in powerful positions, not at the staff writer level. So that's a little bit of a different dynamic, and I think that's probably the key.
Awesome. Okay. I have another one. It's a two-part. Do you feel that higher ups feel like these incentives are being forced upon them? And then to add to that, you say many shows are trying to diversify various positions, but do you feel that they're doing so because studios are forcing them to check this box, or because it's the right thing to do, or because studios don't want to pay for diversity hires outside of their budget, their show's budget? So I guess it's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that, like, you know, I think that somebody can have biased hiring practices and not be sort of overtly and consciously racist or biased, right? Like, you know, it's that old thing of like people hire people who remind them of themselves, or you remind me of me when I was starting off, so I'm going to hire you and give you this slot. I think for a lot of people in Hollywood, a lot of white people who are in position of powers, they would mostly consider themselves liberal people who care about diversity. I mean, I think if you took a survey, they would say that. So I think I think these diversity programs are probably welcomed. You know, I think though what happens when they get to the inflection point of having to keep somebody or let them go, that's a very different question. When they literally have to put their money where their mouth is in terms of these, you know, abstract ideas of diversity and inclusion. So I haven't heard any, and I don't think I would be the person to hear it, because they better not say that in front of me. But like, I haven't heard anybody say that like they feel like these programs are foisted on them. I haven't heard that. Shu, have you?
No, I haven't heard that. Again, I don't know that they would tell me, but I have not heard that either. And I do think people are genuinely trying, especially after this year. I really think people are generally trying to find ways to incorporate diversity, not because they have to, but just as a culture, as a way of doing things in business. Also, we talked a lot about the McKinsey report, which I won't get into a whole thing, but you have to listen to that episode. But one of the things that it points out is that, like, not just having representation on your staffs and your crews and on screen is not just a matter of sort of like ethics. That's great. It's great. It's the right thing to do, but it's also dollars and cents. Like, there is a direct corollary between like what audiences want by what they spend dollars on and what they watch. There's a direct corollary between that and like the amount of diversity on screen and behind the screen and behind the scenes. So it's dollars and cents. And I think companies and leaders get that. So they want to do the right like business thing. And if it aligns with the right ethical thing, then great. Where I think the issue is exactly what you said, that inflection point, and that like policies and systems like sometimes just ultimately run into people. And so, and their own thing. And so when you get to a place where like, I was reading something about, I think it was Ava DuVernay or whatever, but when you get to a place where like, you want to diversify your crew, right? You want to diversify all your department heads, right? You want to have a lot of women, you want to have Black and brown people, you whatever, right? This is what you want to do. But when you get down to that moment of like hiring, like you're looking around like, who do we know? Well, I know this person because I worked with them for 10 years. And I know these people over here that somebody has recommended to me, but like, I don't really know them. Those are the Black and brown people. I don't really know them. I didn't work with them. So like, they tend to choose the people that they know and the people that they've worked with. And those might just be white guys. And so it's hard to like break that ultimately. You know what I mean? That's really hard.
Well, I think it's all, you know, and we're talking to people who could be in a position in post to hire a huge staff, right? Like television shows have huge post staffs, and some of you might be in that position. And one of the things I've heard showrunners doing, even white showrunners doing, to their credit, is saying, you know, if you have 3 editors, for example, for this TV show, and you're hiring, and you know that you want at least one of those to be a female editor, hire her first.
First.
Don't
Yeah.
hire the 2 white guys first and then say, I can't find any white women, so I can't find any women, so I'm gonna go hire another dude. And I think that kind of outside the box thinking is where the individuals like showrunners can really flex their muscle and make things improve. That's not something necessarily that comes from the studio level or the producer level. I think I saw Perry had a question.
Yes, she does.
Hey,
Perry does. Sorry. Go ahead.
what's that?
Sorry,
Oh,
go ahead, Perry.
no, it's all good. Hi, I'm Perry. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I came up in the New York Post world and moved out to LA 2 years ago. Representing, sorry. All my New York friends, I'm sorry. But I work at Netflix in the original film post department, and having come up in the field and working with mostly white men, like I being a white woman was the diversity in a lot of cutting rooms. And so that's something that's really stuck with me is, I don't want to be the diversity. I want to ensure that we're getting tons of different perspectives and we're growing our editorial and post talent, and not gatekeeping, and like you said, not just hiring who we know. And so what I've at least been trying to do on my shows and my post team at Netflix, is we have started trying to put apprentice editors back into the budgets, because it's really just at least for me from the studio perspective, it's really just putting the money in the budget for the apprentices' labor and fringes and their Avid, and working with the union to ensure that they can be on the Avid, because if you're not on the Avid, then like, what are you learning? So I feel very passionate about that. And I, in addition, have also been trying to expand my roster of post coordinators, so that when we hire a post supervisor, I can hand them a list and say, here are post coordinators you may not know. I would like you to talk to them and at least consider them. And we've had a lot of success on a lot of our shows in placing a lot of these coordinators on shows, placing apprentice editors on shows, and just trying to grow a more diverse talent pool in film post. And so anyway, my long-winded explanation to get to my question is, yes, there are unfortunately still toxic people that you're going to encounter. And I think my question is, I've been trying to ensure that, we have an eye on diversity when it comes to these positions of post coordinator or apprentice editor. But if the environment isn't necessarily going to be the most inclusive, safe environment, and they are going to be treated like the diversity hire, despite my best efforts of making sure they feel that from the studio perspective, we want them there, we want them to grow. But if it's not the safest environment, is it better to have the position and know that you're taking that risk of potentially putting someone in an unsafe environment, or do you say, okay, well, that show, maybe it doesn't make sense, let's not have that position. So I'm just trying to understand from your perspective, like, what do I do in those situations?
Well, I think the first thing you're doing is great, which is you're just being thoughtful and considering it. Like, that is such a huge step forward. And I know it seems like the bare minimum to be thoughtful and considerate, but like that comes through, in interactions, I think. And so I want to, commend you for doing that and making that effort. I can't speak for everybody, right? And I'm maybe sometimes I'm like, we joke about this on the show, like I don't have feelings, so my feelings don't really get hurt that much. But like, every Black person, for Black people specifically, and I'm sure other races too, every Black person has learned how to code switch, has learned how to deal in an environment where they're the only person, where they are amongst their people, totally surrounded, and everything in between. And so that's not an excuse, of course, for a toxic environment, of course not. But I do think that you should feel confident that if you pick the right person, they're going to know how to navigate that in a way that maybe they could never even articulate to you. It's sort of like a life experience that we all get as soon as we walk out of the door and start going to predominantly white institutions for school or whatever the case may be. So I think, checking in with them would be a good thing. I mean, I definitely don't think you should shy away from putting them in that position. You know what I mean? Like, I think that giving them the shot, especially from the bottom rung and to work their way up, is something that we all need.
I agree 100%. You took the words out of my mouth. I agree.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's really helpful because I've talked a lot about this with our production HR team internally because we have a whole Respect Act training. Netflix has a production HR team that specifically, wants to make sure that every environment is respectful. People are people, like you said, it comes down to the individual. And I would feel so terrible putting someone in an environment where they're going to be subject to sort of those microaggressions or, verbal abuse. I would never want to put someone in that position, but I don't want to not have the position. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to stop someone from having access to that position because, I understand how valuable these positions are to be able to grow and get promoted out of that and eventually have a career in editorial.
I mean, I think maintaining what sounds like what you're already doing, Perry, but maintaining your position as like a safe place to, a safe person to come to and discuss these issues without repercussions and be open and honest and let them take the lead on what's bothering them and what's not. But like having that open door policy for them, even if it's off the record, as somebody just to be a sounding board to, I think is a huge asset. Like, I've definitely been in situations where I felt alone, like I've had nobody to go to, and I've toughed through it. But if I had somebody who I really felt was on my side that could just listen to me and maybe point me in the right direction when things really needed to, because not everything needs to be escalated to HR, but some stuff does need to be escalated to HR. And it sounds like you are, experienced enough and open enough and sort of savvy enough where an apprentice might not be, to like know what those things are. And I think that just maintaining that open door policy would be a huge help.
That's right. I agree. Even going into a toxic place and is not good. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to go into that. I would be reticent to put someone in that position also. But sometimes places are toxic that you don't know are toxic, and they end up being toxic anyway. So I think the most important thing, I'm just repeating, but the most important thing is to ensure that people have advocates. That's, in my experience, that's been really the key. Is like, yeah, I might have unintentionally been put in a position that's not great, but to know that I had an advocate, to know that I had somebody that I could go to, is huge. I mean, that's huge, and we'll take my concerns seriously. That's most important.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, no, that's super reassuring, and I will definitely ensure that all of our apprentices that we hire and everyone across the board, knows that I am a safe space for them to come to. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Does anyone else have something they'd like to?
We have.
I see chat questions.
Sorry, I was just gonna say I have.
Oh yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, there's from the chat. Yeah. So what are some ways to address the issues of individuals dropping out of the industry entirely? And I'm wondering if, Faye, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm wondering if this is from either not having enough opportunities or as a result of microaggressions, maybe people dropping out of the industry. What are ways that we can address that?
Sure, I can say a little bit about this.
Yeah, because I'm thinking. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, screenwriting is I think I saw somebody the other day say, like, for every position, there's like 1,000 people who want that position. So there's going to be some drop off anyway, simply because it's a very, very competitive field. That people are making less and less movies, you know what I mean? And as you go up the ranks in television hierarchy, those spots get more and more competitive, and there are less and less people to fill them. So not every time somebody who is a person of color drops out of the business, it's not necessarily because of systemic racism or microaggressions. Like, it's just that kind of field, right? Like, it's just the field where not everybody who wants to do it can do it. With that said, I think the more that we can actually have the more that we can have positions around the writers and around the writers' room filled by people of color and diversifying those positions, that's really, really going to help, man. Because I think we talk about Black writers getting in the room or Black showrunners getting in the room, but what about like the Black creative executives that at the studio, or the producers, or the directing staff, or the people on set? You know, as a television writer, a lot of times you're spending a lot of time on set, and that can be rough and stressful too. So I think that one of the things that we can do to, of course, stop the microaggressions and people feeling like they're in toxic environments and having to walk away from the industry is to really just diversify those environments. I mean, I think that would be my number one solution for it. That's easier said than done.
Is there a line between genuinely valuing a diversity hire and putting an individual on the spot?
I'm not exactly sure what put on the spot means, but in this context, but I would say that like in the writing context or even in the editing context, like you are put on the spot. I mean, if I'm understanding what the thing, what the question means, I mean, if I'll just speak from my own experience. Like I'm like, bring me that smoke. I never shy away from like, you want to bring me work, you want to bring me a challenge, great, I'll take it. I'll crush it. That's fine. So I've never sort of like look at it like I'm going to be put on the spot because I'm given like a writing assignment or something like that, or whatever. That's never been my approach, if that's what the question means.
Well, what about the times when you've been the only Black person in the room and you
like to be the Black representative? If it's that, okay, yeah, nah, fuck that. No, but no. Look, the reality is that like and I know how you feel, Sherman, so I'm gonna let you take the bait. But I feel two sides of this. It's a double-edged sword. On the one side, and I feel this way about executives too, which I'll talk about in a second. On the one side, like, yo, I'm a writer. I can write a variety of individuals. I can write from a variety of perspectives. That's what the talent is. That's what it's for. When you read something I write, hopefully all the characters feel genuine, no matter who the characters are. They feel like they're written by someone who can write. That's part of the talent. So on one end, you know, I value that. And I think other people should value that. My bosses should value that. On the other side, I am Black. I am here in this room, wherever this room is made up of, like, to give a certain perspective. That is my lived experience. I'm going to contribute that perspective. That there's 40 million Black people there. I'm not the sole representative, but I also don't sort of like totally shy away from that part of the job. If that's part of what I'm here to do, I kind of understand that. And I sort of like, so it's a mixed bag. I think that could go too far in some ways. And I also think it's like a little bit of a trick sometimes when, like if you're gonna ask me that, then like I need to have authority over what that ask is or what that character is. Don't just ask me something and then you're gonna change it anyway or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Let's not do that. But yeah, like sure, I can own part of that and that's fine. It's a little bit of a, you know, difficult sort of line to walk, but I'm generally okay with that. And I'll just say one more thing about like on that note, like it's somewhat related, but we've talked about this before, Sherm, about executives, right? And like you have, you know, like Black executives at wherever, different streamers, wherever, different places. And like, sometimes you run into a situation where I can imagine that I've never been an executive, that if you come in with like a Black story or Black project, that Black executive is like, fuck, this is why they have me in the room, to listen to this project. Like, I don't want to just buy this project because, you know, this is the Black project that's coming in. I don't want to do that. And then to that, I say like, nah, your job is to buy this project. Like, nah, that's why they brought you in, to curate this. They brought you in for this reason. Like, come on, don't shy away from that. They brought you in because they don't have a curator for Black content that would make sense for that network stream or whatever it is. There's no need to shy away from that. That's part of the job. There's a value in that too. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I also say that like when you're starting off in television, because Shakri and I, we both moved up the ranks, but we're both close enough to our breaking in that we can remember what it was like to be staff writers starting off in the room. Part of your goal as a young writer is to make yourself invaluable. Like part of your goal, and this goes for any race, any gender, any sexual orientation, any demographic. You're an unproven writer in a new situation. You have to make yourself invaluable. I'm not necessarily against if there's a show that's multicultural and there are a few very important Black characters. I'm not necessarily against making myself invaluable because I have really pertinent inside information that I can say about these Black characters that help the show be better and be more specific. I think what might happen a lot, it's not happened to me in my experience, but what I've heard other people talk about is like where they get pigeonholed, where they can only talk about the certain characters that fit their demographic, and they're sort of not allowed to touch the rest of the story. That's whack. That seems like a toxic environment that I would run from if I had the ability. But I've definitely been in places in a positive way where there are Black, Shameless. I wrote on Shameless, and there are it's a big white family, but there are a handful of really important Black characters, right? And I loved to sort of take the ball and run with those characters, but it also happened to be that I was in a very supportive environment, where I really felt like I was valued across the board. And then sometimes they look to me and be like, yo, what's a good joke that a Black mom might say to a Black daughter in this place? And I go, I know exactly what to say because my mom said that to my sister in 1989. Put it in there, you know what I'm saying? So it is like everything we've been talking about, it's sort of a double-edged sword. That's it. We're done.
You just said there was a mic drop. You didn't hear it?
I have a question.
Go ahead. Dan.
I have a question. I'm starting to type it, but I'll just ask. Hi. So
Hello.
I'm a post producer, and there are a lot of post producers in New York, and there has been a movement, at least on New York shows, to increase diversity. And a lot of post producers have approached me and Rebecca, who do a lot for the Post Alliance, about crews and stuff. And there's this funny situation where people are like, we want to diversify. And you sort of mentioned this before. We want to diversify. We don't want to take the time to train anybody. So they're sort of missing a beat in the training period. And I'm just curious, since you're both in LA, if you've seen, it's not a diversity hire where the studio is saying, we'll pay for it outside of your budget. It's, we want to increase diversity because it's the right thing to do. But I encourage, and some studios have added more money in certain positions, such as apprentice editors, to get them up to speed on things, because a lot of people are switching either over from reality or it's their first job. And I guess my question is, are you seeing any sort of movement like that on the LA side? I know you're writer, so maybe you're not as aware about post-production that, diversity is increasing, but also the studios are actually trying to make an effort to put their money where their mouth is, basically. That's my question.
I'll say for myself, the only thing, I have some experience with just in colleagues so this is not coming, directly from me, from the Post side, but from these are things that I've heard, and showrunners who kind of are looking at post departments and trying to fill them out and that kind of thing. So take it with a grain of salt, but this is what I've heard. There are lots of lists. There are lots of lists floating around of people people of color who exist, who may not otherwise be known by certain shows or whatever, or by post soups who can hire. I have not heard much about, the second part, there's a lot of people that I know of who are in that box. Either they cut news, they cut reality, they cut doc, they have a ton of experience, but they're not able to make that jump into the narrative world because no one will take that risk for whatever reason. Seems silly to me. So there seems to be a gate that's blocked there. Because a lot of those lists, by the way, are those people, from what I understand. I have not seen, maybe you've seen different, Sherman, but I have not seen, which I think is important, a concerted effort for apprenticeship or for assistant editing or for any of those things that would sort of like lead to training. And then I see people who are typically like, they want the finished product and they want it to be exactly like the show that they are actually doing right now. So they're not going to sort of take the risk on the person that's had a bunch of experience, but maybe hasn't cut this half-hour comedy. But you should probably give that, that he, she, or they are a shot. They're not going to do that. But I also, so anyway, that's what I've seen. Sherman, have you seen anything else?
Yeah, I have to say that I don't really have that much experience with. I mean, I work with editors as in part of my job as writer producer, but I don't really have much experience in sort of the hiring practices of editing. What I will say is, I think what we should all do when we get in the position to encourage it is like, we have to raise the wages of the lowest rung of the hierarchy, right? Because one thing that we talk a lot about in writing, especially in the assistant world and the development world, is that it's a luxury to be able to take these low paying jobs, because a lot of people have the safety net of mom and dad or just independent wealth. And I think one of the things that might encourage more people to take apprenticeship jobs or to like take low paying jobs to get the training so that they can work their way up is that if the wages were a little bit healthier. So I don't know if there's like an industry wide movement to do that. And I don't know necessarily if that's a showrunner, if that's a decision the showrunner can make, but I don't know. I don't think that really answered Jen's question, but
No, but you did. You made some very valid points. I mean, there have been the low rung positions are not there. It's a very, sometimes it's minimum wage, and it is very hard to live off of that. And I do agree that I think more money should be put into those positions. And the apprentice position disappeared for a while in editorial because some people were taking advantage of it. They were not hiring they were having their post PA do the apprentice work on an Avid, even though they weren't supposed to. Wow. So a lot of shows got rid of it. So there wasn't that problem with the union. And now it's come back and it's actually called an ERA, edit room assistant.
Yeah.
And I do see that more, I think more films enlist that position than series. I work in film, so I believe that's true. I might be wrong. But I do know that a lot of post producers are trying to encourage their studios to create that position or take the money from the post PA, add a little more money to it and make it an apprentice / PA position. So it is more money and it is a growing opportunity because then you're allowed on the Avid. Because how do you learn as a post PA when you're not allowed on the Avid for the union rules? So there's a couple ways to get around it. And around it in great ways to create opportunity for individuals to train them. I just wish I saw more of it. And I was just curious. I know you guys, again, on writing side, but I was just curious if LA is making that kind of movement. But anyone listening to this later, I would encourage you to create an apprentice position on your project.
That's right.
It seems like some people in the comments have some interesting points of view on that. By the way. I'm reading the comments.
Yeah.
I actually just wanted to comment. A couple of us are working with the PNYA, basically this exact thing. I'm an assistant editor, and working in scripted. I worked on a couple of maybe 5 scripted shows in a row, and I've been trying to give producers and other people more names of people that I know who are basically in a parallel position, but in the unscripted world, or maybe they have even more years of experience than I do, but in unscripted. So we're just trying to look at things okay, so if it's a workflow issue, if it's these are what are the things you think this person needs to know before jumping on? And so there are a couple of us who are organizing some workshops and some panels and a Slack channel, basically to try to support people outside of those few things so that when they get a job as a scripted assistant editor, they still have a network of people to ask questions, who the assistant editors that they could be hey, I don't know what's going on with this MXF media, why is everything offline? So to try to get more people in and make that leap, but then also support them as they go. Because, you especially now, it's really hard. You don't meet anyone when you're working at home. And so you're not at a post facility, you're not somewhere where you can create, you know, a smaller community. And New York community is pretty small, and I do feel like it's very supportive, but you know, it's like impossible right now. So anyway, a couple of us are just, I think, and I do feel like getting some there's real interest and real support. So I don't know, I'm excited about that. I feel like it's definitely something that's needed and necessary. And I think there are a few producers like Jen, I know a couple of others that are really kind of the ones who are like making that effort at like disruption, and really trying to disrupt things. And I feel like they're modeling it. I wish there's more interest from a studio or executive, you know, that kind of like top down
Yeah.
pressure, which feels like that's really needed. That feels like where it really needs to come from in order for it to be a more universal push. But you know, I mean, at least there's some disruption. I feel like we're starting something. So any of you who are interested, who are on this, who like want to talk to me about that, you should just hit me up and drop me your email to ASU, and anyone else. Yeah, because we can talk about that. It's in the works. So
That's great.
Hey, Pratt had a question.
Yeah.
Hi, can you guys hear me? It's more of a commentary. Like in terms of like the training part, I wanted to comment on. Like last year, this time, I didn't know like where I was going in life in terms of like, you know, I knew where I wanted to go, but had no idea how to get there. And like right now, I'm a post PA on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I'm at work now. Which was, and a big credit to that was like the Made in New York program, BWI, and Post New York Alliance, and a few people in this room I've spoken to too. So Rebecca. So yeah, and since starting this job, I've actually got like at least like contacted to interview for like 2 apprentice positions. So I just want to say like it does seem like you know, those positions are like opening up, and people are like, I guess, putting their money where their mouth is, like, because like I said, like last year this time, like I didn't know which way was up. Like I was, you know, I want to do this, do I want to do that, and I want to do this, but had no idea how to like get there. So I just wanted to say that.
That's great. We do need a printed. Yeah.
And yeah, so like someone like me, I'm sorry, like my goal is to like be a assistant editor and you know, eventually an editor in the long run. But you know, that apprentice position seemed like the only ideal like bridge job from being like a post PA to assistant editor. Like, you know, the most I can do now is like show interest and, you know, show interest to my assistant editors and editors that, and you know, hopefully, you know, they remember me in the future. You know, one assistant editor actually brought me on to one of her side projects as an AE. So like just from me like showing interest and like kind of being annoying and asking questions every day, and you know, so yeah, I just want to say like things are looking brighter.
That's good. I hope I mean, I would guess from both what Julie and Pratt were saying that I hope that there's multiple bridges, you know what I mean? Like, so there's the apprentice bridge, there's the sort of, or apprentice / ERA bridge. I hope that there's a bridge between sort of, like you were saying, Julie, the ton of experience, but in a slightly different parallel post universe, you know, that can sort of cross over to, because I don't understand, maybe somebody could explain why cutting isn't cutting. I don't get it. But, you know, I mean, maybe if you're cutting the daily news or something, but I mean, other than that, you know, stories are stories, cutting is cutting anyway. But, you know, this sort of, maybe there has some, I always find in this business that like, people have to somehow be like pre-validated in however, in some way. And so if it's like workshops that then like put a stamp on somebody to say like, all right, we have given you the skills to be able to cross over or to do this or to do whatever. We here's your pre-validation, then maybe the industry source is like, oh, okay, yeah, then you're good. So those are good things to create. So
We're like literally talking about trying to come up with some sort of thing. We're like, can we put something on here like so people, it's like, PNY, like whatever,
yeah, approved.
And
Yeah.
we're like they went through the class, they did the thing, like you can hire them now. It's
Right.
I think people like don't imagine that there's like maybe people get just too caught up in their own thing. They're like, oh, you can't possibly know what we do here. And which, they're different, but also like maybe that person has something of value to contribute. Maybe they're used to telling stories in a different way, and then that's useful. Maybe they're really fast. Maybe like they can do things really quickly, and like, wow, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
So there's, I think people are too used to ruling things out and saying like, I don't know if we could do that, instead of like, well, maybe this is a possibility. And so I feel like getting people to shift their mindset and kind of like modeling that is like also a piece of it. Yeah, it's encouraging. I feel like I'm encouraged by, the people who I've met and people who are like, making progress, like Pratt, like finding the things that he wants to be doing and like seeing the way forward. And like I've talked to him, it's like I get people who are like, do you know if Pratt's available? I'm like, I don't think so. Sorry. Too late. Try him next time. But it's exciting. It's great. I mean, there's still so much more to do, but like it's something. So I don't know. It's good.
I'll be available after September.
You know what? It's good to know that. It's good to know that. Not joking.
Good.
Keith, you had a question, Keith?
Not really. I want to say thank you. I haven't been to a Post Alliance in forever. I know Jen, but I did want to speak to Jen. Contacted me a couple of weeks ago and was just like, hey, do you want to do narrative? And I'm like, yeah. And she knows, I think she knows, I've been an assistant 12 years professionally, and I've done news, like literally everything. But I'm just like, the call will come, it'll come. Like, and then, but Jen, I want to tell you, like, my phone has not stopped ringing. So I don't know how I got on whatever list, but it was overwhelming. And I want to say thank you. And I know a couple of people here, Rebecca, I know you from Harbor, whatever, but all of those requests is what I'm saying, because I just want to kind of bring some joy to it, because we're talking about how like, oh my God, it's hard, it's hard. I've had one of the most toxic, I was an assistant to one of the most toxic people ever, but I learned what not to do. And I also pass that information on to cats coming up. And it's interesting what Perry had said about toxic environments. And I have this little thing, and I'm going to be very frank here. I tell my friends from the hood, y'all don't want to get hired because you don't even know how these people talk to each other. And I'm like, you got to be able to handle that, because a lot of times the way certain people talk to one another, it doesn't go down like that where a lot of the people that look like me come from. And I just wanted to address that, because a lot of times when we use a nice word of, oh, it's a toxic environment, right? But we've come to hood, which is super toxic, but a lot of times there's more respect there than in these professional places. And you're just like, wait, what? So I just want to speak to Jen. Thank you. Something worked out, and I'm kind of working with someone. I got a call. I'm like, who are you? Oh, and he's amazing. I'll talk to you later about it. But I think I was Julie. Yes, let's connect, please. And Sherman and Shakri, where is this podcast that we keep? What Spotify? Like what?
It is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you find podcasts. The Diversity Hires. You can go to our website, thediversityhires.com, and just share the podcast with me.
Rebecca just put it in the chat.
Oh, good, great.
Thank you, guys. Love the name, and
Excellent.
that's all I got.
And Keith, you are so right, man. Back when I was an editor, cutting on a show that I'm not going to mention, you have to deal with that stuff all the time. I had a guy who got me jobs. He was a nice guy, really. I remember one of the most horrifying nights was sitting with him and having him ask me, why do Black people like sugar so much? Can you just tell me, what is it about? What is it with the Kool-Aid? I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? But I was like, you know.
Well, the menthol conversation's about to come up because New York just.
Yeah, ban. It's a lot of stuff. So like, there is a whole sort of like area of
microaggressions.
Yeah, and dealing with stuff in a different way that is like, but you have to deal with it. And I mean, you shouldn't have to deal with it, but the reality is that you have to kind of deal with that, and that's part of the sort of education. But yeah.
I'll just share a quick story, and then Twee had something. But when I was working as a coordinator on a project that I'm not going to mention, there was an editor that I literally just asked, do you want your coffee? But I didn't realize that the PA had already asked him. And this person grabbed his mouse, he threw it against the wall, and he's just like, I just want my fucking coffee. And it was something that, me being a Latina, I would have reacted a lot differently. But I just kind of had to, okay, we'll just get you your coffee. So anyway, that's I was just laughing to what Keith was saying earlier, but Twee had something.
Yeah, hi everyone. I earlier wanted to speak on the apprenticeship thing, so I'll try to make it quick. Like Pratt, I came from the Made in New York program, and I work in post-production sound. That's my passion. There's nothing else I want to do but sound. And I remember in that program, I was sent to go see about a job at a post house that I will not name out of respect, but when I walked into the building, like that whole story that some people share about when you walk into a job and you can tell people get turned off because you're a woman or because you're Black. And I experienced that. And over the summer, my first like foot in the door was a Foley studio took me in and let me shadow them the whole summer, which completely changed my life because through Post New York Alliance and that Foley studio, I met a sound supervisor who let me be his apprentice on not one but two of his shows. And I think that's also a key of like not just giving somebody a chance, but giving them more than one chance to do something. And now, like today was literally my last day on the second television show, and I've been applying for more jobs, and thanks to this supervisor like teaching me everything, I have two full-time offers in California. Unfortunately, I will be moving, one at Pixar, which is incredible, and then another one at a big studio called Formosa Group, which is the job I'm actually going to take. And when I first applied to the actual job at Formosa Group, they felt that I was overqualified for the job that I was going for. It's something I never thought I would hear. So they're creating a position for me just to have me there. So I just wanted to like speak to the power of like the right people and the right white people having the power to like bring on someone and do something for them. So yeah, thank you.
That's fantastic. I mean, Sherman and I, do you know what I'm going to say, Sherman?
You're going to talk about advocates? And
yes, you know. Oh man, we've been doing this together.
Talk about it so much, bro. Go ahead. Go. It's great. It's a great point.
One of the things that Sherman and I talk about often on the podcast is whenever we have people on that talk about their experience, whatever level that they're at, wherever in the business that they are, there are lots of varying different stories, but one thing that's always in common is how many people have. Sometimes it's a single person, sometimes it's multiple people, that one advocate that really sort of helped them go from one place to the other and really sort of launch them and help them get them going. And that's just so important. And all of us can do that. You know what I mean? All of us can take one person, two people, and try to push them to the next spot. And that's just fantastic.
And also, no matter what level you're on, man, you know what I mean? Like if you are an assistant editor or a PA in post, there's somebody who wants that job too, that you can like put them on the game about what that particular position is. And so it doesn't just mean that you have to wait until you're at the top of the ladder and you can like have hiring power. Anywhere along the line, people need help and a leg up and advice. And like I know that Shu and I have really, to the detriment of our own calendars sometimes, try to talk to everybody, even though we're not showrunners. We can't necessarily just check a box and get somebody a job, but we really do make that effort. And I think on a micro level, that's so important. So I just second what Shu just said.
Do we have any more questions? Any more comments? All right. Well, this has been amazing. Truly, this has been great, and I feel like this conversation can go for hours. But I just want to say thank you so much, and I'm sure everybody who's listening to this recording, listen to the podcast. We have everything on the website, so you can really understand a lot more. So thank you so much. I don't know, Sucheta, want to say anything?
Of course. No, thank you to Shakri and Sherman, and I'm just lucky to know you guys, and so thrilled that you could join us.
Thank you so much. Great to be here. Good luck to everybody.
I see somebody asked for the email. Hit us up. What's the you can go to the website, hit us up and we can connect through there.
Yeah, thediversityhires.com.
Thediversityhires.com. That'll get to us.
Yeah.
And we can and then we can follow up personally. Thank you so much for having us, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much. It was amazing. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.